Welcome to Make a Path Presents. I'm Ronnie Hayes, and today let's talk about the Walking Dead comic issue 168. There is the variant cover this month with Jesus impaling the walker. If you happen to stop by your comic book shop, don't forget that variant. I wasn't able to stop by the comic book shop today, so I went ahead and got the issue digitally with Comixology, which every time that happens, I love it. I really wish I just read it every single time on Comixology. I try to save a couple bucks here and there, so when I pick it up at the store, I don't end up doing this. But if you don't know Comixology, and this isn't an ad, they don't pay me or sponsor me, but there's something called a guided viewing that is probably the best way ever to read a comic book. I love holding it in my hands, you know what I'm saying? I love physical shit for everything. Video games, comics, books. I prefer physical, but the guided viewing goes panel to panel. It's so damn cool, especially when there's like a shocking page reveal or a turner. I love it. So anyway, check that out if you're interested. But let's dive into this issue. I thought this issue was just okay. I was really expecting a little bit more, and I think the it's dialogue heavy. Dialogue moves the story a lot in this issue, and there's a couple moments where I was underwhelmed and disappointed when it came to the reveals, like, for example, Maggie. Let's get this out of the way, because this is my biggest disappointment. It would go Maggie and then the dialogue. The dialogue just, it wasn't as strong as I was expecting, you know. Negan comes out and gives this big speech, and I was really expecting something deep. But to recap real quick, in case maybe you read it and you read others around it, like the issue before it or the other issue, sometimes people read 2 or 3 in a row just to stick with a nice flow of the story. In this issue only, in 168, we have the cleanup crew. Everyone cleans up Alexandria. The Saviors are helping. They stop. They ask Rick where Sherry is, and they make it clear that even though they're helping now, this is the last time. They don't want to be united or connected with the communities. They want to break off and do their own thing. They want to be their own community that's not responsible, that they don't have to come and help when they need it. They don't have to get involved in trade agreements or whatever. They could lead themselves, which essentially they were leading themselves before. The only difference is the mandatory trade, because we got hints that it is mandatory if you don't, trade with the Saviors, or if the Saviors in Alexandria and other communities aren't trading the bullets or the wood, for example, let's say, they won't get bullets, you know what I mean? So the trade seems mandatory, but that's a positive thing. And then the communities coming to help when there's problems, which it seems like that's also not something that happens a lot. So I think Negan might have been right in this issue, where Sherry just wanted, problems to be happening so she can solve those problems. Maybe to keep her busy. Maybe she was just losing her shit a tad bit, which we did see in the previous issue. So the Saviors say they don't want to help. They want to separate. And Rick tells them that Sherry's dead. It was an accident. They pull guns out. Dwight pulls a gun out, and he tells Rick to get back inside, and then Negan comes out and he says, let me handle this. And then from that point on, it's just dialogue. Negan saying, do you want things to go back to the way it was? And then he told the Saviors to go. They know that Rick isn't a dictator. Go, and when you have problems, and you most certainly will, come back and ask Rick for help. And then once he helps you, and he most certainly will, from that point on, if Rick ever needs help, you guys will be there to help him. So essentially the Saviors leave, and then Rick and gang go back to doing what they're doing, cleaning up. Carl and Lydia go up to bed. They say goodnight to Rick when he's in his house all alone. He takes his clothes off, and then he goes and lays, not his clothes off, he leaves his pants on, but he takes his shirt and his arm off, and he goes and lays on Andrea's grave. So he's kind of still in a shocking state of mourning, So that's the issue. And the dialogue part that I was talking about, with Negan telling the Saviors about how it was, and we can go back to that. And I did find it a little surprising that Mark was the one, someone who had his face burnt. He was the one who knelt down and said we were stronger, even though there was rules and we had to live under Negan's thumbs. We were stronger back then, so he wants to go back to that. And Negan talked them out of that, and he said that, this is probably the best way the communities have been brought together, and it's probably the best way they will ever be brought together, with this type of cooperation, the voluntary, union among the communities. And just his dialogue and what he was saying, what he was getting across. And I'm not talking about the humor part of it. I'm not talking about the Negan dialogue, dropping F-bombs. We got all that. You know, we got the really raunchy stuff, really twisted, a whole paragraph. That's fine. Good old-fashioned Negan is fine. But him making his point, I just really thought we would get some really hard-hitting dialogue in that moment. Something to show us really that Negan is coming around and seeing things a little different, and it's lining up more and more with his "Here's Negan," which is something interesting when you look at this as a whole, because there's no turning around for someone like the governor. The governor's touched. You know, he's touched now. The governor's taken heads, he puts him in fish tanks and all this other shit. He has his daughter, it's not his daughter. He says it's his daughter, but it's really his niece, because he took over his brother's name and his brother's identity somewhat. Because Brian was weak. Brian, what was it? Brian Blake. Is that it? Philip Blake? Something like that. But anyway, wow, it's been so long, I'm forgetting the governor's name. But he was weak. Brian was weak, so he took over Philip. Long story short, he becomes the governor, and he's even making out with his zombie daughter. I mean, he rips out her teeth. He's twisted. He's shot in the head. I mean, he's touched. There's no coming back from that. Any of that. He rapes Michonne, brutalizes her. I mean, torments them, cuts off Rick's arm. Negan lined up people, took Len out, bashed his head into a bloody pulp. You know what I mean? There's definitely violence there. There's definitely issues there. He's definitely touched. But on a spectrum, I don't see Negan anywhere near the type of, messed up that the governor is. They're both messed up in their own sort of ways. But I do feel like Negan is somebody who, when he started initially, this wasn't a person who started, his life in a zombie apocalypse, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to lead all these people, and I'm going to rule over them. I'm going to take all these wives. This is a person who, as things were falling into place, it was like a drug in a way to him. It just got easier and easier to say, we do things my way, because when we do it your way, or someone else leads, or whatever, or if you want to do it your own way, you end up dying. You almost get me killed. So that starts to corrupt him in a way, or he gets drunk on that, like power drunk. But it is different, though. It's not just strictly about the power, but I feel like that plays a huge role in it. Because Negan still has that violent streak, but how much of that is him being desensitized? Because time and time again we see him, not looking on people as valuable as normal people see other people. You know what I mean? Negan has his wife, and that's it. He can understand when people are sad. When Carl got sad, he can understand when, Andrea died and Rick is torn up about it. He says, my condolences. Like, he gets it. But somewhere along the line, Negan just sees people as they either help him survive, they get things done, they're either wives, sexual objects. He doesn't see them the way a person like Glenn would see them. All that hope, their lives have a lot of value. Negan's just Negan, And I still believe and I still feel like they should go down that road where because of that, because of how he looks at people and he doesn't see the true worth, or maybe he doesn't respect life all that much, or another person's life, that makes it easier for him to commit those acts of violence. He's still touched in a sense, but at the end of the day, he was setting up the saviors to keep the communities alive, to keep people alive, to keep society alive, because without it, it's a shitty life. He was on the road alone, doing shit that lonely, annoying, dangerous, all these other things. It's just bad. Going at it alone, going at it in a tiny group. You could be taken over by others. You can be taken over by walkers. It's just bad. So being with a group, being with a society is the best thing you could do. But once Negan was in that position, that just went to his head, and it was his way or the highway. So with everything that happened in this issue, like I said, it's cool. I think it went in the right direction. I think having Negan not come out over the top as a good guy, as a survivor, I think that's the better option. I just really feel like we were missing some iconic, epic lines, and maybe a more look into the mind of Negan in a way. You know, show more of the transformation, I guess, is what I'm getting at. We got a hint of it, just maybe a little bit more polished. Would have made me enjoy it a little bit more. We didn't get Carl's reaction to Negan being alive. I mean, we see their faces, sure. We saw Maggie's face in this one, but I wanted more than that. I wanted Maggie to be just shocked, stupid, maybe an altercation to even happen. Not her attack, but I think there was definitely the potential to have something come up where Maggie runs up to where Negan and Rick are fighting side by side, and this is shocking to her. Maybe it even looks like Negan got out and Rick is trying to capture him again. Just have something. I don't care. I'm not talking about, you know, shooting at him, trying to kill him. Just something other than, you know, the story playing out. And then back in the group, you have Maggie holding Herschel, giving him the stink eye. I don't know. I just feel like there was a huge missed opportunity with that. And I was more excited about Maggie's reaction than I was about the Saviors. I still want to see what's going on with the Saviors, but at this point, I really want them to hurry up because the Saviors story, there's no conflict there really, and it's just not interesting really. I wanted them, you heard me before, I want them to show up, get shot, one and done. It's over. One issue, it's over with the Saviors, because I just don't think that is an interesting storyline to keep unfolding issue after issue. I'm glad they left. I'm glad they're gone, but I would have rather prefer a whole issue, I shit you not, with Maggie arguing about Negan than I would about Negan talking to Saviors into turning around and going home. With that being said, I don't think this was a terrible issue. I don't think it was a great issue. I do think it was heading in the direction it should be heading in. I think that it was just fine. It was a good read, but I'm more excited to see what comes after this. There's a cover that might be misleading. We'll talk about that cover possibly next week. We already talked about the cover, but we'll go into the comic predictions next week. And then now that we're getting more settled into the new place, I will be able... I had to skip last month's comic predictions, I think, but we'll go into that. And then the issue after that, they're on the road. So between here and there, if you want a hint of what's coming with the prediction, it's got to be they discuss the Stephanie and the community at Ohio. Either Siddiq brings it up, which I'm leaning towards that, because it really wouldn't make sense having Siddiq find it just to have Eugene bring it up. So I'm guessing Siddiq is the one who brings it up. Eugene doesn't want to. He doesn't want to betray their trust, but since Siddiq brought it up, Eugene has to bring it up and tell Rick. And maybe since we see Michonne on the cover, maybe Rick is so destroyed by the loss of Andrea that she talks Rick into letting her and a small group go out to see if this Ohio group is real. And I would like to see someone like Negan go. Maybe Maggie's flipping out so much. Rick is like, listen, I got to deal with this Negan situation. And Michonne says, listen, I got Negan. Bring him with us. Maybe even Carl goes. They're not on the cover, but sometimes they're a little misleading. So maybe she's like, bring Carl with us, and we'll keep an eye on him. You can smooth things over with Maggie. He won't be here, so she won't be flipping out as much. Because I do want to see them on the road. I think isolating those two characters, putting them in a situation where we'll see Negan actually put in work and maybe even help them survive along the way, maybe even save their lives, like Carl's life, Michonne's life, and then eventually down the line Negan gets into some shit and maybe Carl ends up helping him, and they bond in a way where there's still conflict there. Like even with Rick, I would like to see Rick, Michonne, Carl, some of these characters bond in a way with Negan where, you know, it's like forming some type of understanding, not necessarily a friendship, but they can't get over that one nugget of what he did, the unforgivable crime of killing Glenn. I think that's an interesting, and it's a sad and tragic, if they write it the right way, I think it's a tragic way to look at their friendship, Negan making this choice. And maybe you can break it down to one day, think back on this, because we see Negan, like I was saying before, we see Negan not valuing human life the way he should. And maybe after getting close to Carl and maybe Michonne or Rick, maybe Negan even starts liking them as friends, and because they can't get over that one thing he did, maybe this weighs heavily on Negan, and we see this turn his character around to a complete full circle redemption story. I think we need something. We need a nugget in there to make the redemption a little bit more realistic and easier for some fans to swallow, and also more interesting. A little nugget there to get over, a little obstacle, and I think that would definitely finalize it, and from that point on we can go into a more interesting story without having to harp on Negan's redemption being forced fan service or realistic. I think that little bit of nugget, I think that helps a lot. And again, if we could isolate Maggie and Negan down the line some way, somehow, and put them in the situation, I think we could reward the fans with some crazy type of story and have Maggie in the same position. And I'm not saying do this with every character, but a select few, have them in the position where Negan might save Maggie's life. I think it would be more dramatic and tragic, crazy, insane if in some way, shape, or form it has to be intense and it has to be real, like a real dangerous threat where Herschel's life is in danger and Negan saves Herschel's life, maybe even gets injured. Like if Beta comes back or sends a Whisperer back and they're going to go in and they even stab and kill a few people at the hilltop or at Alexandria before they leave, and they're up to, maybe they kill the girl, what's her name, Brianna or whatever, the girl who's friends with Maggie. She could be watching, carrying Herschel over, Whisperer stabbing, killing a couple people in an alleyway, and then he jets out of the alleyway. Just as a real quick general example, and he stabs her to death. Herschel falls, starts to run away. You see the Whisperer guy charge after him, and it's a kid. Maggie's not going to make it there in time. There's this dramatic, Whisperer here, couple feet in front of him. It's baby Herschel crying, just going nuts, blood on him from Brianna, make it like all nasty and bloody. And then Whisperer's got the knife, full charge. He's going to catch up to him, and Maggie's just losing her shit, yelling, has her arm out. She'll never reach in time. And then in the next panel, Negan just comes out with some sick shit. Maybe he's making a new bat, or it could even be a hand. He clubs him, Negan gets stabbed, and he beats the guy to death. Something insane like that. Because again, this is tragic and intense, because Maggie would be incredibly, through the moon grateful that Herschel was saved. But it's Negan who did it. The guy who killed Glenn. Something like that I think would just be fantastic. Because she would want to. This is Maggie. Maggie's a good person. Maggie's an incredibly good person. She would want to thank him for that act. But, man, imagine having to do that. I mean, that'd be a tough pill to swallow. And Negan doesn't want to accept the thank you. Again, put in that nugget to have Negan understand what he did and how that's affecting the group, and he doesn't even stick around for the thank you. He leaves Maggie to do her own thing, wounded, and later she comes up to him. And don't have them come together as best friends from this point on, but have a little bit of understanding there, and thank him for that moment. But at the end, it's tragic because they'll never become as close friends as a normal survivor, because of that one crime he committed that he can never be truly forgiven for. All right, I'm going to shut up. I love that idea. Love that idea. If we get anything along the lines of that, which, again, I think the story lines up to fit that perfectly. The story, even if it's accidental, the story has been set into place perfectly to allow something like that to happen. I think it fits too perfect to let it go. Anyway, thoughts and opinions in the comment box. I'm done talking. It's your turn.
Subscribe now.